Yo, what up my dupes? Walkthrough crew is back, it's Cycle 92, and we are going to be talking about what we promised from the last video, which firstly is our water setup. So I'm going to run through this really quickly. If you were watching the previous videos, you know exactly what this room is for. This room also is just for hot water that is clean and accessible. I am closing this entirely off to preserve as much heat as possible. And finally, the room we've all been waiting for. This is the cooling room. The idea behind this is that hot water comes through these vents, pours onto ice, and those mix together to eventually make cool water that gets pumped into these reservoirs. There is some automation here that I want to show you guys here real quick, and we'll go through that real fast. So the automation is basically set up to prevent the pump from pumping until it's pumping water that we actually want to feed to our blossoms, which is going to be between a certain temperature range, which you can check on your blossoms at any time, 41 to 86 Fahrenheit. And the idea with this is that we're only allowed to pump this if it's below 75 degrees Fahrenheit. So you're going to keep those that way, and then you're going to have two more sensors that are hooked up to these liquid shutoffs. These liquid shutoffs will prevent water from coming through pipes, so that way you can determine when you want more hot water in this area. So the idea is you're going to send in hot water, it'll fill up this area with hot water until this tells it to stop. And then the ice will melt, it'll make cool water, it'll get pumped out, and then we just repeat that cycle forever. Now, the only awkward thing with this is that this is set, let me show you my numbers here real quickly. I'm saying that we can only pump this water out if it's below 75 degrees Fahrenheit. That's as warm as I want it to be. So that's going to be on both sides, and they're both going to be sent to an AND gate, meaning that both sides of the water have to be that temperature, or rather below that temperature. I'm also going to say we're only going to be pumping in water from the hot sources if it is below, let's say, 65 degrees. The reason I'm doing this is to make sure that this doesn't get too cold, because it will if you kind of mess with these numbers incorrectly. So basically, if the water here is below 65 degrees, more hot water will pump in. If it is below 75 degrees, then that means it's okay to pump into our reservoirs. And those two ought to keep this roughly between 65 and 75 degrees. There is a chance it could fall below that if you put too much ice in here, which is why I usually set this to about 3 tons and set it to accept ice. You can also accept snow, so we might as well just do that. And again, the ice comes from these biomes that you could be mining out, and these biomes are going to be very useful for the rest of the game, for the wheezeworts, for the ice, and for the sleetweed, which we'll get to in a bit. So, the awkward thing about this is that if you have it all set up, you can be like, yay, let's go, and nothing will happen. And that's because this sensor is not below 65 degrees. So for the time being, we need to flip these and actually let hot water trickle in to start helping melt our ice. We'll get back to this a little bit later. One other note I have for these is that I am placing my liquid vents one tile above this or below the ceiling. That's just to prevent any overpressurization potentially damaging these tiles, which I have seen happen before. So I keep it that way just to help maintain the water levels a little bit. Not super important, but could be useful later on. The other thing to worry about is, let's go back to our skills here really quickly. If you've been keeping up on your skills by this point, you're going to start getting dupes that have very high expectations for their morales, just based upon how you've been assigning out these skills. I typically want to assign skills to first their specialty. So this person's an operator, so I want to max out their operation, and then I'll usually give it to the hearts that they have because these are cheap to give them to it. I think it's like less the normal morale expectation if they're hearts. But then thirdly, to start giving them skills that are just generally useful overall. So this is things like carrying, tidy, which will just increase their carrying capacity, athletics, strength, that kind of stuff. Things that you're just going to get overall use out of. Now to keep up with those demands, you obviously need to start adding to different rooms and different features around your base. So what I did is I changed this from a mess hall to a great hall by adding a water cooler in here like we were talking about in an earlier video. The reason I'm okay with that now is because the source of the water is no longer here, and this might look a little bit different. We'll get to that in a second. But the source of the water that they're going to be pumping out and actually running over here is different. It's not in our cool water anymore, it's now in our warm water. So I don't care if they use warm water for this, and to get more dupe morale, that's totally worth it for me. So that's good. Also, we are going to talk about our next steps for the however long it's going to be. I try to estimate and I always get it wrong, so however long. The next steps are things that I've already done, which is I've added refrigerators and started to specify better food for my dupes to eat. So I have refrigerators here, and I also still have ration boxes, and the reason behind this is because I want to store food in the fridge that my dupes will eat and that I want them to eat. I will store stuff in the ration boxes that is used to make that food. You can control all this in the consumables tab, and you can basically say, you know what, I don't want these people to eat raw meat anymore because that's going to be better off if I cook it. I wish there was a button to do all this all at once, and there's not. That's kind of annoying. And I don't want them to eat raw bristleberries either because I want them to eat the cooked versions of it. So I'm going to uncheck all these, and now what I have going on at my grill and my micro musher is my grill is now set to make bristleberries, barbecue, and pepper bread, which might be like, what is that? Pepper bread and barbecue are the two best foods in the game, so you probably want to keep these on basically forever. And you also want to make berry sludge out of the microbe musher, which I have added. The reason you should start having access to this is because if you've dug into the biomes fairly aggressively, you're starting to get new food types, which are things like peppers and sleet wheat. So the sleet wheat grows here in this ice biome. They'll just grab it if it's on the ground, because that's what dupes do. What is happening here? That was weird. Anyway, so they'll grab the food that's on the ground, and we'll domesticate the peppers eventually. Probably not the sleet wheat grain. I've tried it before. It's kind of a lot of upkeep, but basically this food that's growing out here is just free food, and it's way better quality than the food that you can create naturally right now. So you might as well start getting a hold of that and start making recipes that will use that. So that is the plan for food. You might also notice that I moved all my research and my refinement machines all into this little area. That's to start carving out some space here, which again I mentioned that the space is different. This used to be a giant pit full of water, and now it's half a pit of water. So maintenance, hooray. The other part is that your power grid's going to start getting a little bit larger, and something you can do to help alleviate this is adding one of these power control stations and making sure your power producers are in a room, which will turn it into a power plant. The idea behind this is that these power control stations will take a certain type of metal. I usually just give them iron because iron is very plentiful, and they make chips out of them and they install them on these generators. So if you look at this in this power view, you can see that these are producing 900 watts. They typically only produce 600 watts by default, so it adds an extra 50% at basically the expense of just a little bit of iron, which is pretty good because you are now needing to worry about your coal. So if you look at your consumable ore, we're down to 30 tons of coal, and we're going to start running out because we don't have actual producers of coal right now. We're basically just getting whatever we find on the map. So you can mine this stuff out and it'll give you a good amount of coal, but that's not continual. You're going to run out eventually. So what we do to combat this, and something you're going to want to set up next, is your hatch ranching area. So this is a setup that I have and I've used for a long time. The idea is that you put a grooming station, 4 critter feeders, and a critter drop-off all in the same room. And when those get finished, we'll get back to it and we'll actually set that up. But this is going to be where your hatches live. And the reason you're going to want to domesticate hatches is because you can provide them with food that you want them to eat, and because they produce resources faster than if they're out in the wild. So my dupes will eventually get to building that, and I'll just keep this running in the meantime, and we'll go back and set all that stuff up. The next thing you're going to want to set up, now that you actually have a supply of water here, and especially water that you don't care if it's germy, you can start setting up plumbed bathrooms now rather than using these obnoxious outhouses. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Accept my printables. Sure. Free bristleberries. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set up 2 rows of bathrooms. These are going to only have one entrance and exit so that I can control the dupe hand washing as they leave the bathroom. And the setup for this is pretty basic. Obviously just grab some bathrooms here. I like to leave 2 spaces for sinks on the end just to make sure that everybody washes their hands as they leave. And it's honestly more so for the water that you get from it, which is going to come in handy a lot later, specifically when you're growing peppers, but that's for way down the line. We don't need to worry about that right now. And then obviously you need a door to actually make it a room. The plumb bathrooms will actually give your dupes more morale, and because I'm getting annoyed waiting for this, I'm just going to speed all this stuff up. So prioritizing the bathroom instead. Then all you have to do is just hook up the water here. And you're getting water from this pump, and I would encourage you to use it from this pump because this pump doesn't care about germs. If you send that into your bathrooms with germs, your dupes won't really care. The other thing that I'm eventually going to do way down the line, and just so you know how I'm reserving my space, probably going to use all this for beds once each dupe gets its own bedroom. And then I'm probably going to build showers here as well, just so that all my showers are in the same general area. So that during their bath time, so the order that I want to get here with their schedule is I want them to wake up, I want them to eat food, and then I want them to go down and use either the bathrooms or the showers and then go to work. So all of this being in one clustered area will really reduce the amount of time that they spend traveling. So that's definitely very good. And then obviously just to close this thread, I'm going to set up some insulated piping. I'm going to use igneous rock again for this bridge since it needs to go over that. And I'm just going to set up water to all these things. And again, just like I talked about with the farming, you want to make these lines separate from the ones that you just drag through the inputs, because that'll just mess things up later. So I'm going to do that for both sides. I'm really just buying time so that our hatch farms are finished, so I can set you guys up with that. And then this is going to be very hot water when this comes out of here, so you still want to use insulated pipes on this. I usually like to leave a couple space for the insulated pipes because they could get backed up if there's too much going on at a time. So I'll set all these up. And then we will unite them all, and this is a polluted pipe. And since I'm going to be sending hot stuff through here, I'm going to start actually making these things insulated, so that we're not sending it through pipes that will then lose all the heat and spread it around in the basement. We don't want that to happen. Also, just so that you know, viewer player tip, these bridges are directional. So you can see a tiny little arrow on them explaining which direction they actually go, plus the symbols show which one's supposed to go in and which one's supposed to go out. So that might screw up your plumbing quite a bit, but this is definitely something that you could just steal and use in your builds. So the bathrooms will come up. Once those come up, you can get rid of all your outhouses. Alright, so we now have our sage farming area, or I guess ranching, whatever it's called. By the way, you want to make sure that you do have your farmers get the ranching traits as well. You can also give them to anybody that has the hearts on them, or you could just give them to a bunch of people in general. It doesn't really matter. You need at least one rancher to be able to do this, but what you want to do, on your critter drop-off, specify the animals that you want in here. I'm going to set this to 5 because I think that's the space that this can use. It might be more. We'll check on it in a bit. I'm going to have this accept hatches and hatchlings, and there's a lot of other types of hatches which we'll get to. But we've only discovered the one type for right now, so that's all that we can see. Okay, the reason that there are 4 different boxes here is because there's 4 different types of hatches. So we're going to specify what food is given here for each different type of hatch. Specifically, I want to pay attention to the types of food that you do not want to give to your hatches, because that's going to cause a lot of problems later if you wind up turning very valuable resources into coal, because you can't go back from that. So I'm going to feed them all sedimentary rock, because sedimentary rock is not a very good construction material, and there's a lot of it. So this will keep you going for quite a while. Specifically, never feed your hatches dirt or sand. Those are 2 things you definitely don't want to do. You probably shouldn't give them pepper bread either, because that's like the best food in the game. You might as well just reserve that for your dupes. I'm also going to feed my hatches clay, and since I'm going for higher food quality, I'm going to start feeding these the more crappy food that I might have, like meal lice, muck root, nutrient bars, that kind of stuff. Oh man, I made the same mistake as I always do. If you're going to set these, you should set them on the hatchling versions of them, because then it'll check both. So, clay. Oh, never mind. Man, this is so bugged. They need to really fix this. This has been going on for a really long time. Anyway, let me just check these off real fast. You can see even if they're unchecked for the younger versions of these, you still have to manually double check them. I don't know what the first check does, but yeah, this has always been kind of buggy. So I'm going to set those up for my regular hatchlings. And since they're in columns like this, you can just say, okay, cool, well the leftmost box is for regular hatches. Second box is going to be for sage hatches. These are not nearly as useful, mostly because there's not a lot of things that they can eat that you're really going to want to feed them. You could feed them polluted dirt, but I'd kind of like to keep that just in case I need more dirt later. You could feed them slime, but that's going to turn into algae, which is oxygen, and that's a terrible trade. The rest of these are also pretty terrible trade, so I'm just going to feed them the crappy food, and if they starve and I get them, then I don't really care that much. So nutrient bar, muck root, and meal lice. So that's set up for the sage hatches. Of course, the hatchlings don't automatically take this on, and that's really obnoxious, so we'll just do the exact same thing. Cool. Copy that. Then we're going to do stone hatches in these ones. The stone hatches pretty much should only eat sedimentary rock. All this other stuff is way too valuable. There's no reason to feed them that. So we'll just set these up for stone hatches. And copy that, paste it. And then the last one is your smooth hatches. These ones are awesome. You want to feed these ones iron. And that's not because they're going to turn the iron into coal. It's because they're going to turn iron into refined iron. This is basically just free metal refinement, so you don't need to have your dupe spending time doing that. It's really good. Cool, so now we got our rooms all set up. Now what you can do is you need to grab more hatches. So what you can do is use this capture critters command and find any hatches around the map, and you can mark them for wrangling. And anybody that has the wrangling trait will go up there and they'll tie them up and they'll bring them into the hatch farm area. So I'm just going to scan around real quick. Mark any hatches for it. I'm sure if you see any, you're going to be like, oh, you totally missed one. But that's not going to really do much because these are pre-recorded, obviously. So please yell at your computer monitor now. There's one. There's one. And you might find more. Some of them are buried off in the dirt or whatever, so you might find more later on, but you're going to want to continue to grow this hatch farm up to eventually sustain the amount of coal that you need for your power. Another thing you can do if you really want to accelerate the growth of these hatches is you can put down a couple of incubators, and you can specify for them to bring you hatchling eggs, which will artificially increase the size of your population by, oh, by the way, here you go. He loads them up and he drops them off. Yeah. This will accelerate the time in which the eggs take to grow, or rather hatch, whatever. Hatch. Yeah. Funny joke. But yeah, you can use the incubators. That's really just to make sure that you're keeping up on your coal. Bear in mind that this will take power to run, so it's not exactly a straight up like win. It's more of a little bit of an indirect of like predicting out how much coal you're going to have for however much time. And if you really start to run out of power, you can just drop a bunch more of the dupe manual generators and run that for a little while. But yeah, that'll keep you stable for a little while. One last thing that I know you guys are going to be really annoyed with my builds is that there is a ton of CO2 down here. And what else our water network allows us to do is set up a carbon skimmer. This is going to get rid of any CO2 down here and effectively pollute some water that you send into it, but it's just going to go right back into the network. So it really just takes a little bit of power to do that. And it'll make it much easier to work down here as you start to expand a little bit more. So, what I like to do is I like to space these out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I like to get fairly close to the bottom of your base and place this carbon skimmer there, because then all the carbon dioxide is going to all flow down to here. And this is the lowest possible point on the base, which should make all of this breathable eventually. So I plan this out this way because we are going to be entering the oil biome within maybe the next 60-ish cycles, maybe a little bit more than that. But this is very tenuous. Like, there's a lot to be done here, and you need to be careful while you're doing it. So I wouldn't go too hog wild and start jumping in there yet. But we'll start to get our carbon skimmer up here real quick. I'll dig some of this out so that water will flow down. We'll set up the carbon skimmer. Sure, why not? And obviously you can set up the piping, but it just basically takes clean water and it outputs polluted water. And you can use this Jeremy water if you want to, because it doesn't really matter if you send it Jeremy water or not, so you might as well send it the Jeremy water. But yeah, after this point, your hatch farm should continue to grow. You want to keep an eye on this and make sure that you're not sending in too much hot water. So now that this is filled up to a reasonable level, I'm going to go ahead and reverse these to say that we're only going to be starting to pump in hot water when this is below a certain number. This will start to melt the ice. Eventually this will turn into water as well, and it'll mix with the hot water, and it'll make some sort of usable water at some point. This is still going to take a little while, and we still kind of are on a clock to make sure that our water is ready to go by the time this thing runs out. So we're getting kind of close, but this is all the more reason to start using the natural food on the map, because the natural food doesn't take anything, and it basically just gives you free food rather than spending water growing blossoms. So we're in pretty good shape here. From the time being, you just basically want to keep your eye on the numbers again. Keep an eye on your coal. Make sure you're still keeping up on your algae. Your algae distillers should be almost sustaining themselves. They're a little bit behind from what I can tell, so you can add 1 or 2 more of those, or you can just keep digging into the slime. From this point forward, basically just keep growing those and get your bathrooms up. There's not really a ton to do in this phase of the game other than things you feel like doing. Eventually we're going to go into the air systems research, but we don't need that right now. Another thing you might want to think about is pumping in a little bit more water into our network because we're getting a little bit low in both of these chambers. This is full, but this needs to be more filled up, so we're going to need more water to actually come into this network at some point. So maybe throwing a pump down here or something might not be bad, or maybe in here, and pumping some more in there until you get enough water in your network and that you're satisfied. As far as research, like I mentioned, we don't really need anything. This is also the point in the game where if you feel like you want to clean up a bunch of debris around the map, you can. I've just been ignoring it for now. A couple hatches here. I've just been ignoring it for now because I'm much more worried about getting my water up in a reasonable amount of time. I don't want to have like a perfectly good looking base and then die because I was too worried about aesthetics at the base. But yeah, everything's running, everything's good. I think I'm starting to ramble now, so I'll stop and we'll go with our signature sign off of "Okay, bye."